The Southerland family loves to work 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles.
Oh, that's crazy.
That's something we have just done for decades, and we particularly do them on vacations or on holidays. You know, like tomorrow, we'd have that thing set up and ready to go. And my mom was a Depression-era child. She never threw anything out. She always took care of stuff. One year while we were camping, the box to the puzzle got wet and consequently began to fall apart. But strangely, the pieces within were fine. So she put them all in a Ziploc bag. And about 3 or 4 years later, long after we've forgotten what the picture looks like, she dumps them out and says, "Help yourself." Have you ever tried to work a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle without a picture?
That's torture.
It's nuts. I mean, it's just crazy. And what we've been trying to do for the last few weeks is pull the major pieces of the puzzle of this thing called church into one picture. So make sure that our theology, what we believe about the church, is matching what God says in His Word. And we've had one major verse that we've been looking at as the big verse for this series. It's where Jesus says, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." In other words, you got to get a church fairly sick to keep Jesus from growing it. He wants to build His church. So here's the big idea for the series. This is week 5. We're wrapping it up. We got 2 for the price of 1 today. Rob and I are both up. So if you like young and sassy, that's Rob.
Thanks.
And if you like seasoned and many miles and more to go around, that's me. And we're going to talk together today about this. Here's the big idea. Jesus calls us to be the church, not just go to church. Mm-hmm. Some of you got up this morning and said, "Let's go to church." You can't go to church. You are the church. Everywhere you are, church is there. He calls us to be the church, not just go to church. So we're going to do a little bit of review, Rob, and put together some new ideas and wrap up this series in a very important time in the life of Westside, because if we don't have our theology right about the church, we're going to miss it. We got to have the big picture in mind. So 4 pieces and then a new thought.
Right on. So let's start with puzzle piece number 1. And here's the idea. Church is not an activity. Church is an identity. And this is a fundamental difference. And we talked in week 1, we had this little picture of the building versus the people. And here's why. Church is not a facility. The church is a family. The church is not a program. The church is a people, the people of God, saved by the power of God, for the purposes of God. The church isn't a building, it's a body of people working as one. And there's a difference between activity and identity. See, identity is who you are. And I had an opportunity recently when I was traveling to India to visit our One Life partners to see a very clear snapshot of activity versus identity. I had the privilege of spending the day with a church there that's serving orphans. They're a very generous church despite their lack of resources, caring for the poor and the hungry. And I was standing there with the church, and I took 2 photos. The pastor was right in front of me. Click, 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 just like this, 2 angles. And right in that moment, as I looked at the photos, I thought, this is the difference between church as activity and church as identity. Here's photo number 1. And it's easy to look at that photo and say, there's the what? The church. That's not the church. That's a building, right? Look at the next photo. Boom. That's the church. That's the family of God in that village, caring for the widow and the orphan, living out the way of Jesus. That's the church, because church is an identity. And Paul talks about this identity in Ephesians chapter 2. We looked at this passage the first week, and we actually just sang it in that song, which was written by Jason Mills wrote that. It's pretty amazing, huh? Yeah, it is. And here's where it came from. You'll recognize the lyrics. So then you are no longer foreigners and non-citizens. In other words, we're citizens now in the kingdom of God. That's what it means to be the church. but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of God's household. Yeah. Underline those two words, God's household. We'll come back to that in a minute. Because you have been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the cornerstone. In him, the whole building, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. We are the house of God. We are the house of God where he lives. And then Paul also uses this interesting phrase, write it down, we are God's household. We are God's household. Now this word carries a lot of freight in the New Testament. It's a definitive word describing our identity as the church. And I want to give you the Greek word for it. Household is oikos. That's a fun word to say. Oikos.
Hold on. Oikos is yogurt.
This is true.
That is my favorite brand of yogurt.
I like it with the fruit on the bottom. Anyone else?
Oh, yeah.
The blueberry on the bottom. And that's exactly why I actually want you to have the Greek word. Because there's a difference in what we think of when we hear the word household and what the early church would have thought of. See, when you and I hear household, we think of a nuclear family, a singular family unit, a small number of people that live in one house. The last census says there's 3.19 people per what? Household. Now, I don't know what a 0.19 person looks like. I don't know if it's just legs or the arms or torso. Anyone feel like a 0.19 person this morning? All right? But that is not what Paul had in mind when he wrote this. And it's not what the early church would have thought of. The household, the oikos in the first century, was more than just your immediate family. It was your extended family. And I mean extended spiritual family. It's the people that you do life together around the mission of Jesus. It would have included neighbors and coworkers and friends. It would be your tribe where you would look at each other and say, we are the church, and we do life together on a daily basis, and we're helping each other love Jesus, become like Jesus, and share Jesus. That's what Paul is talking about here when he says oikos. And there were two primary ways the church gathered in the early church. Why don't we look at that?
Yeah, look at this passage, guys. Day after day, in the temple courts, underline temple courts, and from house to house, the underline house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. The church at this moment is only a few months old. Now, when you can get a snapshot of something that's brand new, you get a true feel of the DNA. They're already meeting in two places, temple courts. That's this. That's the big gathering happening at Lenexa. That's the big gathering happening at Speedway. It's the big gathering happening at Lansing. It's the big gathering happening in 11 different locations and church plants we're part of in Kansas City. It's the big gathering happening on the internet. It's all of us together. Temple Court, you need the big thing, the gathering, but also house to house. That's oikos. That's literally the idea of you need a big gathering and you need a small one. I love coming here, being encouraged, worshiping together, seeing tons of folks. But my oikos is Sunday night. My oikos meets at 7:30 on my driveway around a fire pit. Those are the guys I do life with. Those are the guys that I do the tribal thing with. We need both. If you're doing one without the other, you're missing half of the DNA.
In fact, write this down. The temple gathering, in essence, you know what it was in the early church? It was a collection of many households.
Yeah.
In other words, it wasn't about individuals coming by themselves. It was about these oikos, these extended spiritual families who were doing life together day to day. They would gather together as one big movement in the city of Jerusalem. And Dan, I love the way you describe this. I've heard you say this probably 3 or 4 times since I've been a part of Westside family. Write this down. When we gather, we are not Westside Family Church, but Westside Family Churches. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, there's tons of churches here. There's the church that's your small group. There's the church that's mine, that is Rob's. There's Evan and his group over there. There's the church that John is part of. There's the church that Danielle is part of. There's all of us together. Let me say it in an even bigger way. You probably haven't heard me say this one, but this is some new terminology that we want to begin to use. We are not one church with many locations. We are not one church with many locations. We're one movement with many churches. It's a movement of God. So are we the church when we're gathered? We are. Are we the church when we're in the small oikos with yogurt? I think I'll bring yogurt to my fireside tonight. I don't know if we're that secure.
They'll probably throw it at you if you do that.
They might throw it. They'll probably throw it in the fire. They throw everything in the fire. Now, there's an interesting thing, though, Rob. There are some strengths to the gathering.
That's true.
There's some things that we can do together.
In fact, write this down. The temple gathering allows us to do things together we could never do through households scattered alone. Think about it. For example, we have this shared work called Avenue of Life, which is literally breaking the cycle of generational poverty in one of the most under-resourced neighborhoods in Kansas City. That is a collaborative work that no individual oikos could do by itself. Am I right?
Yeah.
But as we work together, we can actually change the trajectory of an entire neighborhood. That's amazing.
It is amazing. And no individual fire group or small group or oikos could sponsor 1,000 orphans a day.
That's
but
true.
Together, we can do that. No individual group could start 130 new churches in the last 3 years in Laos. Together, we can do that. So it's both and. It is never either or. And if some of you are not in a group, we got good news for you. Later today, we're going to tell you how to get some oikos, how to get in a group.
And
really important.
Here's why, because everyone needs an oikos.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're just in the temple gathering, you're actually missing most of what it means to be the church. The Bible talks about this community where we love one another, where we bear each other's burdens, where we forgive one another, encourage one another. All these one another commands. You can't do that with 1,000 people in a big room, am I right? Where does that get real? Where does that get transformational? Where does that get tangible in your life? In this oikos, this tribe of what, 5, 10, 15, 25, 30 people who know you and you know them, and you're on mission together in the mission of Jesus. That's the best environment for transformation.
So we're going to give you a blank that everybody's is going to be different. You ready? Write it in. Who are the names of the people in my church? Start writing names. I mean, I'd have to write all the guys in my fireside group. I'd write those names. I'd write Rob and Brian and the pastors I get to do life with. I'd certainly write my wife's name in there. Who are you doing life with, church with, oikos with? And again, good news, if you don't have names to write down, we're going to help with that later today. So puzzle piece number 1, the people of God, church is not an activity, it's an identity. Puzzle piece number 2 is this idea of the priority of the house of God. And we spent a whole week talking about this, so I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes reviewing that. Write this in. Church is not an event, but it's everyone on an everyday mission that includes every area of life. Rob came up with that, and I think it's absolutely genius. I like the 3 everys. Everyone on an everyday mission that affects every area of life. That's how we want to live. That's the priority of the house of God. And here at Westside, we've decided that our priority, you know this, but write it in, is loving Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and sharing Jesus. And we've had people say to us before, that's a lot of Jesus. That's the point.
Yeah, it is the point.
It's about him.
You know, this dynamic that you call an oikos, some people would call it a network. Some people would call it a tribe. You know what? That's transcultural.
Yeah.
I mean, people tend to gather and have a network of 20 to 50 people. What makes it the church is the fact that Jesus and his mission is at the center of it. And in other words, this whole oikos becomes the church when Jesus, loving him, becoming like him, and sharing him becomes the priority and the center of God's household. And you can write that down.
Yeah. Now, I've heard some people say, I don't need the church. I can worship God alone. Go ahead and put an S in the middle, an S for self, if that's what you're thinking. Because you have just taken away 15 New Testament commands about each other. You can't tell me I love Jesus, I hate your wife, which is what we're saying when we love God and we don't like the church. I mean, you tell me you love me and you hate my wife, we're going to have an encounter. And it won't be pleasant. I'd understand you not liking me, but hating my wife, let's go, baby. That's not going to work. We need to know Jesus is the center of everything we do. Now, write this in. No individual or family is big enough, this is why this is important, to make us into the people God designed us to be. No, you can't just do it with your individual. You can't just do it with a family. We all need a bigger spiritual family that's oikos, to love, to become like, and to share Jesus. I know people tell me all the time, I can love God and don't need anybody. You can't love God and not love His church. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. Turn to your neighbor and say, you need me, baby. Tell them. You need me. There is no doubt. So just a general question. What's your next step in loving Jesus, becoming like Jesus, or sharing Jesus? If you know what you need to do next, put it in. So puzzle piece 1, people of the house of God. Church is not an activity, it's an identity. Number 2 is the priority of the house of God. It's not an event. Everyone, everyday mission, every area of life. Number 3.
And puzzle piece number 3 that we're snapping into place is the prayer of the house of God. And write this down. Jesus designed the church not as a passive observation. Church is a prayer-inspired participation. Think about that. Church is not just a passive observation. In other words, if the church was a ship, there are no passengers. There's only crew members.
Yep.
If the church is a team, guess what? Everybody in this room has a jersey, and you've got a spot on the field. There are no bench warmers. And what kind of activity is this? It's a prayer-inspired participation. In other words, we're a part of a supernatural work. The church is about more than merely human effort, producing merely human result. That we serve a God who has this endless reservoir of energy, kingdom energy, that is released into situations. It changes people and it changes things. And you know how the energy gets released? It's called prayer. And we learned about 2 dynamics of prayer. Brian walked us through that prayer, the highest form of prayer, isn't a monologue, but a dialogue. Prayer is not a monologue, but a dialogue made up of both listening prayer and missional prayer, or mission-focused prayer. In other words, absolutely, there are requests that we make, but fundamentally, the highest form of prayer also involves listening.
Yeah.
And we looked at the Lord's Prayer. This is our example from our Lord on how to pray. And it starts out, Father, who art in heaven. What's the next part? You tell me. Hallowed be thy name. In other words, you are the person who is the high king of heaven. Yes, you are my Father. Yes, you are my Papa. Yes, you are my Abba. But when I pray, I am literally standing in the throne room of the high king of heaven. And what do I owe to the high king of heaven? Reverence. You know, if you were to walk into the presence of a king, you wouldn't come in just blah, 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 blah. You'd have a sense, you know what? I should probably let him speak.
Can you do that again?
Sure. Blah, 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 blah. It's easy. I do it all the time.
I can't do that.
And think about it this way. Have you ever had one of those one-way phone calls where the person starts talking?
Oh, yeah.
And they won't stop talking?
Oh, yeah.
And often it's a salesperson. They don't want you to get a breath in, right? Because they want to get through their whole thing. You know what? The natural downward gravity of our prayer life is for our prayer to become that. Where I'm just talking. I love what Brian said. It's not even a monologue, it's a me-log. And really, my prayer life devolves to me trying to get God on my agenda, and I'm just going to machine gun him with my requests. And you know what? We're looking at a completely different way of praying, where we start by listening and saying, Father, what are you doing? What are you doing that I need to be paying attention to? And that leads to that mission-focused prayer, which is then, let thy kingdom come, let your will be done. In other words, God, I want to be a part of what you're doing. And this kind of prayer, it's like a flywheel. When you listen and say, Father, speak, and then you begin to pray, let thy kingdom come, it unleashes the power of God into a community. And what we're saying is the church, the oikos, is a community that is saturated in this kind of prayer. Yeah. And it changes people and it changes the world. So we want to ask you to ask yourself this question. Right now, with you as an individual and your oikos, what is Jesus saying? And if you can't answer that question, it might mean what?
It means you're not listening.
Not listening.
I mean, if you don't know right now what Jesus is saying to you, you're probably doing all the talking and none of the listening. Because I find the minute I listen, he's got plenty to say. Fourth piece of the puzzle, this is fun, the preparation of the house of God. It's an interesting concept in Scripture. It tells us over and over again that God walks before us.
That's right.
That he clears the way, that he's working and he's ahead of us, and all we have to do is get in his wake and follow him. So here's what we need to know. People experience Jesus when they encounter the church of Jesus. Now, obviously, church is not a building, it's us. So how are people going to first know and learn about Jesus? They need an encounter with somebody that's Jesus with skin on. And that's me. And that's you. Think about how God works. He prepares their heart to be open for the gospel so that you in your relationship can live the gospel in front of them, and when the time is right you can speak the gospel to them. He prepares them, he prepares you, and he gives you the opportunity to speak. Why would I be afraid to speak up for Christ if he's already cleared the way? In high school I played football, I played fullback and defensive end. And fullback, I really enjoyed because we had one guy that went on to play D1 football, huge mountain of a guy. And he played right tackle. It did not matter which play the coach called. If I got the ball, I was going where that guy was. Because he could clear a hole. I mean, the other guys are trying. I'd fake left just so coach would say, oh, you tried, and I'd go to the right. I'm going to follow the guy that's clearing the hole. Jesus has prepared the gospel. He's prepared the way. The communal witness of changed people living in loving Jesus-centered community is the greatest, write that in, apologetic for the gospel. It's the greatest explanation of the gospel. When they see our oikos, I invited an unchurched, doesn't know Jesus yet friend yesterday to my fireside tonight. And the biggest reason I invited him is he will see the gospel in action. He will experience it with those guys around the fire. Now, he may not know what to do with it, but he's going to encounter Jesus tonight. Yep. And it's going to be an awesome moment. So here's the question. Who is it that you'll invest, that's spend time with, and invite, that's tell them about Jesus, about your oikos, about your church, into the gathering, that's the big group, and into your oikos? One of the things I'm most excited about is we've got new opportunities to be inviting new people with the new space that's coming our way. God has already walked before you. He's prepared the way. Last piece, Rob.
Listen, as these four pieces, snap, 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 click together, you can see a picture of what you could call the purpose of the house of God. The purpose of the house of God. We are a community of people in oikos built around the mission of Jesus. And we move forward by way of prayer. And guess what? Everybody's invited. Everybody's invited. Anything's possible. And we're invited not because we're good enough, religious enough, or smart enough. Everybody's invited because of what Jesus did through his life, death, and resurrection. We're an open community, an inclusive community. And this is the purpose of the house of God. And if I had to summarize it with one word, it would be the word worship. Now, I know this is a churchy word. And when I say worship, we tend to think of the songs where? Before or after the message, right? We think of a category of music. And you know what? By all means, that's included in worship.
Yeah.
But that's like a teaspoon of the ocean. And Paul gives us an expansive definition of worship. In Romans 12:1, it says this, "Therefore I urge you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." Write this down. Worship is offering my entire life back to Jesus. Worship is going all in. Worship is saying, Jesus gave his all for me. Jesus loved me with a love that is beyond my wildest imaginings. He's invited me to be in his family, this community called the church. And he gave everything so I could be a part of it. And so I respond, not out of guilt or compulsion or to earn something, but out of love.
Yeah.
And we're at a pivotal moment in our time as a family. God is blowing doors open that none of us probably would have imagined or guessed.
Yeah.
We're literally experiencing the favor of God. And before we break into this new space, this is a moment again for us to say, we are your church. Jesus, you went all in for us. We're going all in for you. And I want to invite you to stand to your feet now. And as we sing these songs, no one else can say these words for you. But let these words be your prayer to say, Lord, I'm yours. We are your people. We are the church.